Hi guys, just before we start the episode today, whatever platform you are listening to this on, whether it be on the podcast, Apple Podcast, YouTube, whatever it is, please support it. Please like, subscribe, whatever you can do. We want to reach as many people as possible. So please do that and we'll get right into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today, I am really excited to have on the show Elisha Cicirelli. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did pronounce it correctly, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, as I was doing it, I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna mess this up." So, just to give you guys a bit of an introduction into Elisha's story, she was actually diagnosed in 2013 with a severe autoimmune disorder that affected her life day in, day out. Disappointed with the traditional medicine approach, which was not focused on the root cause of her symptoms. She made reversing her autoimmune disorder her top priority. As a Ph.D. scientist, she took a thorough scientific approach to unraveling her health mystery and immersed herself in all things autoimmune. Today, Elisha has been in remission for almost 4 years and is able to enjoy a life which is no longer dictated by her autoimmune disorder. She now dedicates her time to helping others reclaim their own lives and their own health. And so, she's a perfect person to have on the show. She's used her story to help others. So thank you so much for coming on and bearing with me while I poorly pronounce your name. How are you?
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me. Thanks for that really nice introduction.
No worries. Cool. Well, if we could go back before 2013, before you were diagnosed, and I guess maybe take us back maybe even further before you were having symptoms and stuff. What was life like health-wise before that? Did you always have stuff going on, or were you living a pretty healthy life?
I was always kind of sick, I guess I would say. Some of my earliest memories, I remember when I was 4, I was hospitalized with asthma. And then I remember when I was 5, I started having chronic stomach aches because I was bullied on the bus on the way to school. And I just remember not wanting to go to school because this boy who was a few years older than me would always bully me for a half hour on the way there and a half hour on the way back every day. And my dad eventually had to call his parents and ask his dad, please have your child stop bullying my daughter. But then I remember throughout grade school, I always kind of had asthma. I always kind of had colds, and I did a lot of sports and I was very active, but I was sick a lot and I had allergies quite a bit. And then junior high and high school, definitely more bullying again. This is by a girl actually. And I just remember freshman year being really struggling with depression. And I share that because I know a lot of people have these types of things. So I just want people to hear that piece. And again, more bullying. And eventually she moved, her parents and their family moved. And then, so the rest of high school was a little better because I didn't have to deal with that. Then I went through college and had a really good positive experience there and felt really fortunate to have just great college experience. And then started grad school a month after I graduated from college. So pretty quickly after that. And that was another big stressful thing because I didn't feel as prepared for grad school as I would have liked and felt it was just highly stressful. And then I started getting IBS, which I'd never been diagnosed with before, but people who have this know what I'm talking about with the chronic, almost felt like a knife stabbing my stomach. I would get that during meetings when I would be sitting listening to someone talking. And so they gave me some sort of medication to take for it, but didn't really address it that well. And after my first year of grad school, things got a little better. I met my husband, we were dating, we got married a few years later, and then graduated. So I was in grad school for about 5.5 years. And then I did a postdoc after that. And that was mostly okay health-wise. And so then I'm in my early 30s now. And so my husband and I wanted to start a family. So we started that process, and I'd been trying for a few years, and we're having fertility challenges. And as anyone who's gone through that knows, it's this monthly loss that you go through every month when you're not successful, right? Every month. And I was really in a really dark place, I would say, after 2 to 3 years of going through that with all the treatments and all the stuff. And my sister had had her second child. So this was December of 2012. So like December 31st, she was born. And we went to go visit her in the hospital. And she's this beautiful little girl, a perfect face. And because it's Christmas, they have her literally in a stocking in like the hospital. I mean, it was like the cutest thing ever, you know. And I felt this, like my heart was like breaking, as close as I could ever have felt it breaking. Just the anguish of not being able to have a child, you know, struggling with that. And then seeing my niece, and I was so happy for my sister, and she's beautiful, this little girl. I felt so much pain. And I share that because 2 to 3 days later, so it was January 4th, 2013, I started having autoimmune problems.
Wow.
And now I can look back and see the different steps in my life and what led to that. And I think the fertility challenges for me were the last straw, you know, that broke the camel's back there. But at the time, I never connected the two. You know, I didn't connect that these were actually somehow linked or related. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, this all makes sense. You know, the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences around the bullying and some other stuff I experienced growing up. And then, you know, at some point, your body just can't take it anymore. It's too much. And for me, it manifested in these health problems. And so anyway, so that's when I first started having true autoimmune issues was January 4th of 2013. But before that, you know, I had asthma and allergies and other stuff. But that's when things really, my life really changed at that point. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
Sounds, yeah, and particularly with, you know, with the fertility issues, and I can't even imagine what that must have been like. I think it sounds like, and this is actually quite a common thing when people have come on the show, they talk about their childhood, and it's almost been normalized to go through what they've been through with, I mean, not necessarily the bullying, but I mean, bullying's normalized, unfortunately, as just a way of things that people have to go through. But like, I guess asthma, those kinds of things. And it's just like, well, that's just normal. That's just what I have to go through. Did it feel like that? That was just who you were? So.
I guess kind of. I know my mom always struggled with asthma when she was little. And it was, I would say, though, amongst the other children I knew growing up, I was more sick than most of the others. I knew that. And so, yeah, it was kind of, I think nowadays it's even more normalized, the asthma and allergies. That's like, everybody has it, right? That's what it kind of feels like, at least with our daughter, that they kind of are like, oh yeah, you know, but then I didn't know any other kids I went to school with that had asthma.
Right.
And I'm from a very rural part of the United States, so more the mid part of the country. That's very like farmland. And so, yeah, I didn't know any other kids that had asthma growing up.
Yeah, I guess, sorry, when I say normalize, I mean, as in, it's kind of, you just have to accept that that's how it is. That's how it is for you. That you're just a little bit different than other people. And that you have to accept that. That's what it sounded like.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. Just kind of like, well, for me, it was when I would get sick. If I had a cold, then I would often get asthma. So, yeah, it was kind of, eventually I did grow out of the asthma, but then I had allergies. So,
yeah.
Trade one for the other.
when I look at my childhood as well, and still now I have loads of allergies, and like you can see the stepping stones to where you get to. So I think you said, did you say January 2013? This is where, okay.
When I started with having everything.
So when you said the first signs, what could you tell us through the part of that story?
Sure. So I was at work and I just eaten my lunch and I just felt, all of a sudden I felt like numbness on my face. And I'd never had that happen before. So obviously I was like, what's going on? And one of my coworkers, I asked her, I'm like, I feel like my face is numb. And then she said, yeah, it looks like it's swelling. And obviously that's really scary. And so I went to the doctor and they told me I was having an allergic reaction, which I was like, yeah, I know. And then I had hoped that this was just some weird blip, some weird one-off thing. But I went like a week or so later, I made like an actual real appointment at an allergist's office. And then that's when I was diagnosed with chronic idiopathic angioedema and hives because I kept getting the angioedema reactions.
Right.
So first it was just here with after eating something. And then I remember, I think it was a few days later, I ate part of an orange and immediately my face started swelling. And I was like, that's not the way my life, what's going on? That like literally a week before I could eat all these foods fine and not have problems. And now all of a sudden I'm sick. And so I remember asking the doctor, well, why am I sick? What's going on? He's like, oh, we don't know, and I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Like, what do you mean? And like I was just saying, I just kept remember thinking, literally a week ago, I was fine. Obviously, like I said, I had all these kind of other things in the background going on, but I wasn't alert, like so sensitive to all of these foods all of a sudden. And so for me, it was literally like overnight, I became really sensitive to stuff. And I remember the doctor just told me to take lots of Benadryl and Zyrtec. And that's literally what he told me. And he was like, come back in like 6 to 8 weeks. I remember looking at him thinking like, what do you mean? Like, that's the plan? Like, and I was 33 at the time. So I remember thinking like, okay, so I could live another 40 to 50 years and I'm just supposed to be taking these the rest of my life. Like, I just was like, this is not what this is. So anyway, that was right away, the initial diagnosis. And then a few weeks later, I thought, oh, maybe it's just that doctor. So then I went and saw another one and she gave me the same diagnosis and the same stuff. And then I was like, okay, this is not going to be my path because I was not happy with just that whole situation.
So, because I think a lot of people can waste a lot of years going down that path though. And many of them have been on this podcast where they will continue to take medication in the hope that, because I don't know about you, but I was raised on like, you go to the doctor, they give you a pill, they get you better. I didn't really ever think about root cause or, what is it that's causing this? I just want to get this symptom away. What was it that made you think, okay, well, no, it's not about treating the symptoms. It's about actually finding what's actually causing this?
I would say partly my mom was a little bit more holistic based growing up with things. So she would be, even with my allergies, we went and saw kind of the more cutting edge allergist that was like 4 hours away to drive to, because the treatments they did, we actually do nowadays, which is really funny that like 30 to 40 years later, these are still the treatments they do. But that was like very cutting edge back in like the late 80s, early 90s. So she was always a little bit more about questioning kind of like what you're told, just, but my dad is a doctor, like a veterinarian. So a very different perspective. So imagine like those two worlds. So the interesting thing is I am actually kind of really in my views on a lot of this, the merging of those two worlds too, as a scientist and then taking a more holistic view to my health. Yeah. But so, yeah, I'm trying to remember now what you were asking specifically about where that came from. But like, I think I just knew that it was not going to be sustainable for me to be on these medications, which by the way, I couldn't even tell if they helped. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Because it was very confusing to me around, am I supposed to be taking like 5 Benadryls a day here? Because you know how exhausting, literally tired they make you. But I'm like, if I'm not having reactions, should I be taking them anyway? It's like, it was never like really clear to me. And then when I would have a reaction and I would take them, I couldn't tell if they actually helped at all. So then I was like, what? Like, I don't understand how this, for so many reasons. Some people may notice they actually feel better with their medication. For me, it was like, I couldn't even tell that it was helping at all. So that made it a little easier for me. But they did prescribe me an EpiPen. They recommended that.
Right.
And so fortunately I never had to use it, but maybe we'll get into it at some point. I got pretty close a few times actually as things got progressed. So
Could you tell us a little, so how was this affecting you on a day-to-day basis as were things getting worse then? So from the moment, that first week, did things get progressively worse? Could you tell us a bit about the time period that this was happening?
sure. Yeah. So I had already been working with an acupuncturist for fertility stuff. And so I would go see her weekly anyway. I joke she was like kind of like a therapist too, because I don't know if you've gone and seen an acupuncturist, but like at least the one I had seen, they know things about, like when they look at your, your pulse or your tongue, they'll be like, oh, you've been eating too much dairy or something. You're like, oh, how do you know that? And like, or spicy foods, or, oh, you've been under a lot of stress. They can read like different things. And so she already kind of knew with things that I had experienced with fertility, she already knew me. And so when I went to her and shared, shared this just kind of most recent health update that wasn't obviously good. And so she had recommended actually taking gluten out of my diet. That's what she had said. She had said, I work with a lot of people who often, if they make some dietary changes, it can really help them. And so I was really resistant at first because I was like, that sounds horrible. Like, I don't want to do that. And then this is again, 2013. So people were not really like as into that as they are now. Right. Yeah. And so, but my reactions kept coming. I was getting them multiple times a week, and I was getting hives also. So it was, at some point I just realized there was like nothing else that I could do or try. And so I just felt that like I kind of had to try this. And so I did. So I tried initially taking gluten out, and within 3 days, I was shocked at how much more energy I had. And I've basically been gluten-free since 2013 now. So noticed generally felt better, overall better. But I was still getting reactions, not as often, but I was still having them. And I could still have my job. I could still work, but there's definitely times where I'd have to leave early or whatever, because my face was swelling up at work or things like that. So it was kind of a Band-Aid that, helped initially. And then I also cut out dairy because she also had recommended that. And I didn't notice as much with the dairy cutting that out as I did with gluten. But then I spent about 3 to 4 years down the diet rabbit hole, as I call it, because everything I had read around alternative ways to manage autoimmune or, quote, heal autoimmune was like through diet, everything, all the books that I had seen at that point. And I thought, well, nobody else that I had found were talking about any other things around mind, body, or any of that. And so I kept doing all that, and I did AIP, and my husband, he was a little annoying at times because he'd be like, I don't know if this is actually helping you. And I'd be like, oh, don't say things like that. Like, I was like, I only need whatever encouragement. I don't need, the constructive.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I think this is as if you've done the more restrictive stuff, trying to go out to eat or go to social things with people, like good luck ordering something from a restaurant. And I had like all of this anxiety too around being the difficult person at dinner, that you're like, you call the waiter over and you're like, I can only eat these things. Can you make, so the mental toll, by the way, of that AIP was not good. And I never really saw any benefit getting that restrictive at all with my diet. So that was where I was, Phil, at October 2016. So I spent like almost 4 years on the diet route. And what happened, because I hadn't actually addressed any of the other stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into, is my symptoms were getting worse. So I was eating super, super clean and, I mean, I had nutritional testing done and the dietitian was like shocked. She's like, based on your health issues, I'm shocked that your nutrition, like all of these micronutrient levels are, and I'm like, yeah, because I eat like kale and sweet potatoes and, all like, oh, I'm rotating my greens every day and everything. But I was still so sick. And I started having angioedema of my throat. So normally it was just my eye would close. So I might wake up at 3 a.m. with my eyes starting to close or my lips starting to swell or after eating something at work or whatever. But now it was my throat. And so obviously that was terrifying. And I had read different things online around if you have, likely what I had was mast cell. I tried to get in with a doctor, but it was a 1.5 year wait list. He was a mast cell specialist, which hopefully is not like that anymore. But anyway, they said, if you have mast cell, EpiPens may or may not be helpful. For some people, it actually can make the reaction worse. So I was like, okay, so my throat's doing stuff right now. And then they were like, oh, if you go to the ER, be careful because some people at the ER may not know how to handle or treat this because they don't see it very often, right? So like, they may try to give you stuff that could potentially make it worse. I'm like, okay. So, so I remember this was a particularly bad, I remember my throat, I could feel it. Yeah. And I was freezing cold. My whole body felt cold and it was shaking. My whole body, my legs, everything was shaking. And I was like, oh my God, am I going into shock? Is that what's going on right now? I'm like, is my body going into shock? And, my husband, he was like sleeping because it's like 11 o'clock at night or something. And I went downstairs and I just like sat in our kitchen and I like sat on this mat. I just started crying. And I had asked my grandma who had passed away like 20 years earlier, because she's always, I can tell, like watches over us and helps just with other things she's helped them with. I just asked her to please help me because I didn't know what I was going to do. And I didn't know what else to do. And my body eventually calmed down. And so that was one of my lowest points then. And I remember thinking, I was 36 at that point, and recognizing I didn't know how much longer I was going to live. Like this literally could kill me. Like that was this realization that it wasn't just annoying anymore, like embarrassing having my lips swell or my eyes at work that looked weird because like I was, had an angioedema reaction. Now I'm recognizing like this could literally kill me. And that was really terrifying, that realization that this could really, so that was, that fall of 2016 was my worst or my lowest, because I just didn't know what else to try. I hadn't, heard of anything else. And I don't know if you want me to go into I'm actually okay because I found the answer.
Absolutely. We have to have that part of the story, otherwise it's a bit depressing podcast. Let's just talk through the bad times. But that being said, I'm glad you shared that was your lowest, because I think a lot of people are listening to this right now at their lowest, and unfortunately for some people, that lowest can last a very, very long time. And I guess there's different levels to, the lowest. Where are you at in terms of like, could you see a way out at that point? Were you still maintaining, like, what was your goal at that point? Did you always think I can beat this, I can get better? Or was it, I just need to manage where I'm at?
I just was trying to survive.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't know. Literally so fall for me was always bad for some reason. The change in seasons, like I might be doing might have been like quote, okay, maybe in the summer, something about like November and December, and where we lived at the time, Minnesota, it was very cold and snowy. And I just always did bad in the fall. And so, I just was thinking month to month, like praying that I would make it through. And really recognizing this was a really serious situation and I didn't know what else to do. I was still reading online, and there was a woman, a website that I would go to, and then she had a newsletter, and her name was Yasmina. So she was like the low histamine chef. And she has since passed away from breast cancer, but I share this because she was so helpful to me. And she had a webinar, and this was the beginning, it was like January 1st or something like that of 2017. So 2016 was a really hard year. 2017, she had a webinar. It was like $99 or something, you know, and I was like, oh, it's an hour. I don't know, you know, but she was very, just with the content she would put out. She used to be a CNN reporter. So she was like very like thorough with her content. And I was like, I trusted what she had to share. And so I purchased a webinar. I watched it. Literally the best $99 I've ever spent in my entire life. Because she talks about the book, The Last Best Cure. And I'll say it again, The Last Best Cure. And this book was life-changing. It's on my website, and I talk about it on Instagram. You might have seen it on there. Because in this book, the author, Donna Jackson Nakasawa, shares her story of healing from a severe autoimmune disorder. And so she talks about, at the beginning, she's, you know, basically can't even climb the stairs. She's just not in a good situation, and talks about her journey. And she's a science writer. So she's trying to find, how do I heal my body? And so she talks about a lot of the mind-body stuff, the whole area of medicine, psychoneuroimmunology. So how the brain, the nervous system, the immune system are all interconnected. And so when you have immune issues, you likely have other things that the brain, nervous system related that need to be addressed. She talked about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that I'd never heard of any of this stuff before. I remember reading this book, I was just bawling, and the realization hit me, is this it? Is this why you're sick, Elisha? This. And so then I read her follow-up book, Childhood Disrupted, which is, you know, very well done, obviously challenging topic, but like very well done. And then, you know, read Bessel van der Kolk's stuff, The Body Keeps, all of that stuff. And just because I'm a scientist, I want to learn more, right? I'm like, okay, so what other things are people saying about this? And so I remember, I think it was like April of 2017. I remember I was reading some of these things, and I looked over at my husband, and I'm like, I think I need to go to therapy. Because I was like, you know, you're reading all these books, and I'm like, I can't do all of this work myself. There's no way. Like, I can't. I just recognize that, like, this is not like, nor do I want to have to try to, you know, navigate all this myself. Because as you're unearthing things and learning about adverse childhood experience, all these things, is like, I need someone to help me with this. So then, so then I started. The first therapist I saw, not that great. Second one was absolutely amazing. And she was a trauma-informed therapist who actually helps people with fertility challenges. So it was like a really good fit. And she was amazing. And so for like a year and a half, I go see her about once a week, and we would just work through, as I call it, unpacking the garage, like pulling out the dirty boxes and going through stuff. And as I started working with her, I would say about 6 to 8 weeks after that. So doing a lot of, you know, heavy emotional stuff, right? Releasing a lot of stuff, emotions that I hadn't dealt with in 30 plus years. Like, and, you know, so my body is going through a lot of emotional stuff, right? But I physically started feeling better, which I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I'm putting myself through like a lot of emotional stuff, but I noticed that I was able to start eating foods that I couldn't tolerate. All of a sudden, I could have small quantities of some things, and like berries and things like that, that I couldn't even have eaten even months earlier. And so I knew that I was on the right path. And so I just kept on that path, and I kept using that book as kind of my blueprint, I call it, for healing around things she recommended, around self-compassion and all of that. And so I just stuck with that, and I've done a bunch of other stuff since then, but that was my turning point. But 2016 was a horrible year for me, and 2017 was transformational.
And so at that point, had you pretty much turned your back on trying to do physical stuff to get better? or were you still trying to do stuff alongside that, or were you like, I'm all in on the mind body connection?
I would do, so I kind of did like, so I had seen 3 different naturopaths over the years. I don't know if in the UK it's, you know, I'm talking about, but
Yeah.
I remember, and the last one I saw was really good. She was very good at what she did, but she was like, you know, I really want you to do some Epsom salt baths, you know, for liver stuff, because a lot of us have liver issues too. And so I would try to do some of that stuff, but like she had recommended homeopathy drops for me. I'd tried those didn't help. I did all sorts of gut protocols and gut testing and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I just gave up, because basically she told me without really saying it, Elisha, I don't know what else to try. With like the 3rd naturopath I'd seen. And I remember looking at her and going, and I highly, highly respect this woman. I remember looking at her and thinking, you've got to be kidding me. You have nothing else. Well, let's try these homeopathy drops. And I was like, I tried them. I'm like, I don't notice any difference. And so that was kind of, to answer your question, that was my last kind of alternative. I'd still been doing some acupuncture, I think, and been doing trying to do Epsom salts baths, but it was more just therapy. And then now I recognize the therapist I was working with would do she recommended meditation. She recommended some of these more integrated things. So I was doing kind of the nervous system and brain work all together at that point. But yeah, I didn't really, I mean, I was still trying to exercise and do things to keep my body healthy, but I knew kind of with the naturopathic space anyway, I kind of exhausted what they could help me with.
And for those listening, including myself, who's like interested in this, is it about, because we've had a lot of people on the show who've healed through brain retraining, and with that, I guess the theory behind it is letting your nervous system know that you're safe and that there's nothing threatening it, and that it can, therefore the body's organs and systems can do what they're meant to do because they're not in this fight or flight mode. Is that essentially what this therapy and stuff was doing for you?
Yeah. So I actually had never even heard of brain retraining until like a year or 2 ago. So I did my own version of it, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I did therapy, but then what I would do is when I would have reactions. So I did have to retrain my brain around when I was having reaction, how I was going to respond to it. So a lot of us with chronic health issues, our amygdalas are like full in control. They love all that fight, flight, fear, everything, right? And so when I was having a reaction, and this is also to credit my acupuncturist, if she hears this episode, she'll be like, she asked me, she said, Elisha, what if you just let the reaction happen? I'm like, oh, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because, normally I'd be like, oh my God, I'm in a meeting and my lips swelling. What am I going to do? What are people going to think when they see my face? And so I thought, okay, let me try this, Elizabeth. Let me try letting the reaction happen. And let's just see, So it was like a Saturday morning. I'd eaten something that my body at that point didn't like. And so I could feel my lip tingling because that's how my stuff would start. And I thought, all right, it's Saturday, whatever, bring it on, go for the reaction. I don't care. Like, I was just like, seriously, whatever. I give in. And so then like 15 minutes later, did the lip tingling again. I was like, whatever, fine, And then like a half hour later, did again. And then like an hour later, I'm like, wait a minute. My lip never did anything. Are you kidding me? So this is what I would do every single time going forward. Because when I was in a meeting or when I was whatever, like if I noticed it, I'd be like, whatever, fine. And then eventually my brain now knows I don't care. Like, it's not like I'm not giving it confirmation that it's a big deal.
Yeah. Wow.
And over time, in combination with the other stuff I had done, that's what helped me heal. So I guess in a way, yeah, my own version of brain retraining, I guess. But yeah, I mean, very like active, like when I would have stuff or when I would have hives or whatever, I'd be like, all right, whatever. Okay.
Kind of like playing it cool with your symptoms. I like that. Okay. Wow. Yeah, no, I can see how that could be, because when people start to get a symptom, they then focus and freak out on that symptom, which then creates more alarm in the body. And then there's this vicious cycle that happens. And what you were doing was breaking that cycle that had been going on for years and years. Is that right?
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
So I was telling it, there's like I'm trying to think of the video, but there's a video, it's like a Native American parable about like the wolves coming in and like basically letting the wolf lie there. Instead of like getting like, oh my God, the wolf. Oh. Instead it's like, okay, it wants to sit there. All right. And so it's not giving it more power. And you're not confirming to your brain that this is definitely a problem, that I need to be focused. And you're not creating more pathways that enforce that in the brain.
And so after doing this work, I mentioned at the beginning that you're in remission now, which is amazing. Like how long did it take you to get to the point where this wasn't bothering you on a day-to-day basis?
Oh gosh, I think so. 2017. Let me think. September. I was thinking about this before we chatted. Like, when do I consider myself like healed? Like, at what point? I was like, okay, so let me think. The rest of 2017, I would say I was still working on stuff. I mean, I would still have reactions, but they would become less frequent. So instead of like weekly angioedema reactions or like monthly, now they're maybe every 2 months or every 3 months, or hives. I started noticing also what was triggering them, because the noise was so coming down so much that if I did have a little like blip, that I was like, oh, that's what's going on there. Certain family member or whatever like triggers me. And so I started being able to recognize that. I would say into 2018, I would say about a year. Well, I was able to start introducing foods pretty within 6 to 8 weeks. I just kept doing that. And I kind of would just over time, in a compassionate way, be like, well, let me try a little bit of this tomato sauce, or a little bit, rather than, I'm not going to make a whole big plate of something for myself, but I would try a little bit and just see how I did. And if I did okay, I was like, wow, all right. When I would feel up for it, not like pushing myself every day, but if I felt good, I would try it. And then try to think, it was the next spring, maybe 2018, definitely like at some point, probably not even a year after I started therapy. Yeah. I mean, I got to a point, even if I did have a trigger thing, and if I was in a meeting, I'd be like, oh, now I know what I need to do, whatever. And then it would just go away. And I was like, all right. And so I just kind of kept with that. Eventually, physically, I got to a place like where I was still just doing kind of elliptical, not full like pushing, because I used to be pretty athletic when I was younger. And then I got to a place where I could actually do spin classes, like fully pushing my body. Wow. So I worked up to it, because it wasn't like at first I would do like a 60 to 70% and just kind of see how I felt. But if I felt all right, the next time I do 75, I just slowly worked up. And then I got to a place where I could like just go on full on. I didn't feel like I had to be thinking like, oh, can my body handle this? I was like, no, I know my body. I just have shown it the last few weeks. So there was things like that it was more, not so much about diet at that point, but just more physically getting to a place where, I felt healed, fully healed. So yeah, hopefully that answers kind of what you're getting at. So I'd say it probably took it was gradual, but I would say for sure by like 9 months or so, I wasn't really thinking about it anymore. Like,
so you went from not even, your goal wasn't even to recover, your goal was to survive at the end of 2016, to a point where it wasn't part of your daily life anymore within essentially a year. That's amazing. I think when you were talking about the diet, because it makes sense, doesn't it? You're having reactions to food. Okay, well, it has to be diet that I solve it with. And I think that's what a lot of us get, and me included, get very fixated on things. And I've had a few people on the show who actually then got a condition, I've forgotten what it's called, where you're so hyper vigilant about food that then takes over and you create a condition about that as well. So yeah, just an observation, really, just amazing that you were able to get away from that. It's just all about food, which must have been difficult.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's so hard. I like to use this analogy. When I started, when I was sick, I had this pile of keys, is the way I'd like to think of it, and like the door. And I assumed one of those keys was going to unlock the door to healing, right? So I tried like how many different keys. And when I was at my lowest, so October 2016, I basically had like 1 or 2 keys left on the floor at that point. I knew it wasn't diet. And I did not, like I said, I hadn't heard any other things around mind body work at all. And I thought, oh my gosh, like what else am I going to try here? And so, yeah, I just knew diet wasn't going to be the thing, because I didn't see any positive impact from making more changes to my diet in my health. And oh, by the way, I kept a food diary for like 4 years straight because I'm a scientist, and I remember being like, what am I doing? Like every morning I would write everything down, like finding the magic thing. Don't do that, please, people. Don't do that.
I actually don't have the ability to be able to do that. I'm the opposite of a scientist. So
it was like my lab notebook every morning. I'm like, what am I doing? You know, oh my gosh, that was okay. Anyway, sorry.
So you meant, and with the fertility stuff, I mean, you mentioned that you have a daughter now. So I imagine that sorted itself out. Like what happened there?
So she's adopted, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, so we so still on the journey, I'll answer.
Right, okay. So do you think that is that because I hear a lot about people struggling with fertility when they've got autoimmune issues, and when they work on emotional stuff, that then does help with fertility. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to fully go into all Elisha's health issues here, but I like to describe it like pulling the layers off of the onion, right? Yeah. And so I had all of the autoimmune stuff, and now I'm starting to recognize in the last year or so, working on more of the adrenal issues stuff. So cortisol imbalances and all of that, which then impacts progesterone, all other hormones in the body. So like, you kind of have to keep, you know, how do I say it? Going through each of them, I've found. And so that's kind of been my next things that I found. And also like for people, I'll say, I think I've had borderline PCOS, never knew it. So I knew I was sensitive to carbs, which a lot of times it's not easy to diagnose PCOS. And so now recognizing blood sugar regulation for me is really, really important. I mean, I already eat like a very healthy, clean diet, but recognizing like I need to be really vigilant in the mornings about getting enough protein and fat at breakfast so your blood sugar stays consistent. So then that affects all your hormones the rest of the day too. So I'm kind of just, to answer your question, learning more about how all of these things are connected. And yeah, so we'll just see, you know, but it is pretty fascinating how they're all very much, you know, interconnected.
Yeah. Well, I think it was someone might have been on the show, and it was they were having fertility issues, and it was something like your body's not going to want to, I guess, help create another human being if you're like, it's something like if you're still in fight or flight, like consistently, it's not a safe environment to grow another human being. Does that make sense?
Absolutely true. Yeah. Because your body is going to be focused just on surviving. So if it thinks that your survival is threatened, then why would you devote energy, literally resources from your body, and take it away from your survival to create another human? It decides, you know, like at a very like primitive level, like that's not going to happen. That's not going to work. We just want to survive the next year or whatever. And so then once you're safe again, then we'll consider that again.
Yeah. God, it's crazy, isn't it? The human body, mind, God. So I mean, looking back on like what you've been through, and you know, particularly since 2013, what are the ways in which your life is different now, and potentially better as a result of what you've been through, compared to maybe if you not have had to go through what you've been through?
Yeah. So I would say a big one for me was boundaries. So I never knew what a boundary really was. I never learned it growing up.
Right.
And so that has been a huge thing for me. It's very different. I talk about this with people when I coach them too, around mindset. And sometimes mindset sounds like just be positive. And like, that's not, I talk about the boundaries piece. That was huge because you have to be willing to say no to some things to be able to say yes to your healing.
Yeah.
Like you can't think that like you're going to somehow live your life the way you've always been living it and you're going to work in healing along the way. Like that just, I view autoimmune as a message our body's trying to get us around changes that need to be made in our life. And so boundaries were a huge one for me around specific family members, around interactions, all of that stuff. And then working on the self-compassion piece, which sounds all like hippy dippy stuff too, but like it gets at kind of neuroplasticity, what we were talking about before around, we need to create new positive pathways in the brain, not more of the perfectionistic or like, I need to have control pathways, because those actually aren't serving us. Those are actually contributing to kind of the more, frankly, a lot of the health issues we're having. And so compassion and compassion for self was something, the book Radical Acceptance, that Tara Brach's book is amazing for that. And that's been a huge change for me too. Still working on it, I would say. And trying to think of other areas that, just all of the work, the anxiety work too, that I've been doing the last year or two. Again, another layer to the onion, that been doing a fair amount of breath work that I didn't know I had anxiety almost my whole life. I think also if you're around a lot of anxious people, you think that's normal behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that's anxiety. Oh, okay. And so recognizing things that, like how sensitive I am to caffeine. That was like, I just learned that like in the last few months. Like, so you're asking about all these things, like I'm digging, here's another layer, like, and cutting out even like small amounts of regular, I can maybe do decaf coffee, but like even like dark chocolate, more than a few squares, like I can just feel my body like, and I'm like, all right, don't want to put myself again, right, in that fight flight mode. And so just learning about just listening to my body more and doing meditation daily. Those are all pieces that I look at things having gone through this journey and then hopefully have another 40 to 50 years of my life left. And I look at it and go, like, I feel fortunate that I learned this early enough that hopefully, I have a number of good years left too. But like, I just recognize like, if your health is not in a good place, like nothing else matters, right? Like, I'm not going to make like all these sacrifices professionally for what, right? So if I don't feel healthy, then why am I doing this? What am I doing? And so it's changed a lot of that, and kind of a lot of the stuff that is I've also questioned like kind of the, why am I doing this? What am I trying to get out of this? Or what's motivating me in this situation to whatever, right? Put out my course in record time. Like, why? Like, like if it's causing me to not get enough sleep at night and it's causing me a lot of stress, like maybe I'll wait to launch in January instead. Like, just recognizing like, it's okay to also put boundaries around our own health too, and saying, no, too much. So those are kind of, to answer that question, my life's basically changed in almost every area.
No, definitely. Well, it sounds like it's changed what you said there is, I talk about it on the podcast quite a lot, about being young enough that we're lucky that it's happened at an earlier stage in our lives, that we then get to experience the good things after it. I've mentioned my parents a couple of times. they'll never listen to this podcast, so it's fine. They like my mum's got really bad back pain, like so bad. And I sent her this book about it's healing back pain. A lot of it's about emotional work. And she just immediately replied back and just said, this is physical. It's not a mental thing. So, and she's too old now to like change the way in which she thinks. And I think I'm lucky now that like, when I'm in my 70s, I get a really bad back or I get something like that, I will know enough now from what I've been through that I'll be like, oh, maybe I should look at my emotional state at the moment. And I feel like, yeah, that's kind of what you were saying, that like this has happened to you early on enough that you now get to experience a whole different side of vitality for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I recognize also letting go of control was like because, initially, and it's natural, right, to try to control our health, right? If I only eat these foods, then I'm okay. If I only take my supplements, I'm fine, or I'm not fine, but I can manage it, right? And recognizing like there's so little we actually can really control in life. And so working on that has been a huge thing for me too. And the freedom that recognizing like, I don't know what my health's going to look like for the next 40 to 50 years. Okay. But I have tools now. Before I didn't have tools, and letting go of kind of because a lot of people struggle with, they've come out of the health issue. Oh my God, what if I get sick again? Oh, that whole piece. Right. And so it's still something I work on, but giving myself the freedom too, to not try to have put these unrealistic expectations around like perfectionist, my health has to be perfect for the next 40 years or I fail. Like that's ridiculous, right? Like maybe you have a bout of eczema a year from now and like maybe there's some stuff going on. Like, okay, that's a sign, that you need to make some changes or whatever. So anyway, that's my thing on that too.
My final question to you would be, thinking back to that darkest time that you had, you said it was at your lowest point. As I said, there'll be a lot of people listening to this right now who are in that stage. What would be your advice to them right now, going through that and giving them hope that, they can think better things are coming?
So what I would say is to please be compassionate to yourself, because the last thing you need is more criticism and just anger at yourself. I remember I was so angry at my body. I thought it had failed me. Why did I didn't deserve this. I tried, and recognizing that a lot of us, we call it inner child, right? Who are we when we're 6 or 7 years old? And like most of us, they just need to be heard. They want someone to listen to them. And so what I would do when I would have a reaction or I wouldn't be feeling well, is I put my hand on my heart and I would just say like, how are you doing today? I'm so sorry you're going through this. It'll be okay. And it sounds weird at first and it feels weird at first, but then I noticed that my body needed it. It needed that kindness and compassion. And so that's a really good place to start for people, because the body needs to feel safe, literally, to devote resources to healing. We didn't even get into vagus nerve stuff, but it's really true. And so if we can calm the body through that, or even just having someone you trust give you a hug or put their hand on the middle part of your back. I noticed for me, when my husband would do that, my body would calm down when I was cold and all these things. And so those are things I would just say, speaking kindly to yourself is so important. And if it involves, you have to do journaling to get out some anger, start there. But the emotions are so important, because a lot of that is the stored emotions are what's driving things. So we need to start getting those things out.
Yeah, definitely. Amazing advice. If people want to connect with you and reach out to you, ask you any questions about today, how would they best do that?
Sure. So I have a website, so bravelytogether.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at bravelytogether. So yeah, I do coaching and I also have a self-guided course. So
perfect. I'm sure people check that out. The great name, by the way, Bravely Together. That's a really cool name.
Thanks.
And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's really hit home for me a lot on a lot of those points. So I'm sure it will do for everyone else. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And I'm excited to get this one out to people.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.